Burnout Paradise is considered by some to be one of the greatest racing games ever made, a masterpiece that was so influential that it would define the modern open-world racer. Now, I love the Burnout games. Like, I really love them. I own every mainline title, including both the PS2 and 360 versions of Revenge. Some of my favourite gaming memories come from this franchise, not least of which is the hundreds of hours I sunk into Burnout 2 at a friend's place, playing on his tiny 34cm CRT. But would you believe that up until recently I had never played Paradise? When it comes to racing games, I prefer closed-circuit races over open-world games, and for this reason, despite loving all of the earlier entries, I skipped over Paradise. But curiosity hath finally claimed stewardship of my brain, and I've now played through it. Sorry, I've been playing a ton of Space Marine 2 recently. Now, it's not my favourite Burnout game, actually it's one of my least favourite, but it is the most unique, and I think it's the most interesting. So in this video, I want to talk about how it came to be, EA's influence on the series, and how it left a mark on the racing genre that can still clearly be seen today. I also want to talk about the various versions and what the best way to play it is. I want to talk about how successful it was, what I think it got wrong, and in spite of its flaws, why I think it's still a good game. There's a ton to get through here, so let's slip it into H and get started. Burnout Paradise is the sixth and final mainline entry in the series, and it's also one of only 2 games developed for the 7th gen platforms, with the other being 2005's Revenge. I think it's fairly common knowledge that Paradise was successful, but what I don't think many people know is why we haven't seen another game since. The short answer is EA, but to answer this question properly, I want to take a stroll back in time and look at how the series began. Only the first 2 games were published by Acclaim. Developer Criterion Games was owned by Canon Europe at this point in time, and Acclaim had purchased the publishing rights. The first game was a moderate success, but unfortunately due to financial problems, Acclaim was unable to market the sequel properly, and it's believed that this had a significant impact on sales in North America. It's around this time that Criterion was approached by EA, who would end up purchasing the publishing rights for the Burnout franchise in 2003. The relationship with EA wasn't immediately harmonious. In fact, it almost completely fell apart after a falling out where certain members of EA threatened to sue the studio. But eventually both parties came to an agreement, on the proviso that Criterion had full creative freedom to make the game they wanted to, so long as that game was Burnout 3. Burnout 3 Takedown released in September of 2004, and a month later, EA's acquisition of Criterion from Canon, along with the rights to the Burnout series, was formalised. Burnout 3 was the most financially successful game in the series. Unfortunately, despite the subsequent games continuing to receive top marks from the critics, each game would sell roughly half as many copies as the previous one, with Dominator apparently selling about the same amount of copies as the first game. Although this isn't all that surprising given that it came out in 2007, which was 2 years after the Xbox 360 launched, and it was only available on the PS2 and PSP. The declining sales meant that it took some convincing before EA gave the go-ahead for another Burnout game. The feeling at EA was that Burnout lacked the cultural relevance and bankability of the Need for Speed franchise. There was pushback on it being open world too. Open world racing games might be the norm today, but back in 2008, while there were plenty of examples, a highly dynamic and social racing game, particularly one from a franchise in decline, was thought to be risky. Criterion really bet the farm on this one, pooling all of their resources to make it happen. And at launch, Paradise would appear to silence the critics from within EA, reviewing well and selling over 1 million copies in its first 3 months. It also had a number of successful paid expansions that kept people playing long after launch. Ultimately though, it wasn't enough to satisfy EA's bean counters, and Criterion's next game would be 2010's Need for Speed Hot Pursuit, a conventional closed-circuit racer with what remains today one of the greatest trailers ever made. This was their first attempt at a Need for Speed game, and it sold about 5 million copies, almost twice that of Paradise. The writing was on the wall, and Burnout was done. With the exception of a minor spin-off in Burnout Crash, Criterion's next 2 games would be Need for Speed titles. In 2013, it was announced that they would be shifting their focus to non-racing games such as Battlefront and Battlefield. The same year, about 80% of the studio's staff were relocated into Ghost Games to continue working on more Need for Speed titles. It's at this point that Criterion Games co-founder Alex Ward and studio director Fiona Perry decided to leave and start their own studio, Three Fields Entertainment. While the Criterion name still exists, it exists in name only, and with the rights to Burnout being owned by EA, who'd clearly rather make more Need for Speed games, the future of the series is unclear. So I think it's at this point that we should shift gears and talk about the game itself. Yeah, there's going to be a few choice car puns in this video. For context, I'm playing the remaster on a PS5, which runs at 4K and 60 frames per second, and I'll talk about the different versions in detail towards the end. Paradise's structure is a big departure from the other games in the series. Not only is it presented as an open world, the races themselves adopt an unstructured format. This means that they don't follow designated courses, allowing you to choose your own route to the checkered flag. Shortcuts and alternate routes have featured in previous titles, but here there aren't any tracks at all. The big wayfinder arrows are completely absent, and the only visual cues as to where to go are a tiny compass at the top of the screen, street signs, and your indicator lights. Otherwise, it's up to you to figure out the fastest way to the finish line. Events aren't selected from a UI. To start them, you drive to their location on the map. Events need to be discovered before they show up in the map too, which means you'll need to drive around to find them. There are well over 100 events, and they range from races to time trials, events where you have to destroy other cars, and conversely, events where you have to stay alive. There's also billboards to smash through, epic jumps to jump, vehicles to chase down, and plenty of other things to find. It's not exactly emergent gameplay because most of this stuff is baked into the environment at designated spots, although the process of finding and entering events feels far more organic than it does in the earlier games. The selection of vehicles, especially when you include all the DLC stuff, is bananas. All up, there's 150 vehicles, and the remaster includes all of the DLC vehicles by default. There are quite a few cookie-cutter cars here, but otherwise there's a great selection of unique vehicles with nuanced handling properties. Not including the DLC content, there are 3 classes of vehicles, each having their own strengths and weaknesses, as well as unique burnout gauges. Car handling is as tight and responsive as it's ever been, and it's incredibly fast. Actually, some of the vehicles are so damn fast it doesn't make any sense. This is arguably the best game in the series in regards to the feel. This is especially true with the remaster because the image is so clean and the performance is so rock solid. Navigating the twisty roads and various obstacles, even in the fastest cars, is relatively easy because you can clearly see things in the distance and in your periphery. Visibility started to become a real problem with the PS2 era games because the presentation simply couldn't display everything you needed to see with enough fidelity. I find Dominator, for example, to be almost unplayable at times. The amount of effects combined with the speed and the resolution just looks like pixel soup in some situations. Despite essentially being a 16-year-old game, pretty much everything looks and sounds incredible in Paradise. I've played plenty of racing games that came out after this, decades in some cases, that don't sound this good. Multiplayer gives you both online and local modes. Freeburn Online allows you to drive around and take part in events with randoms or set up your own private events. The local mode is a party mode that has you competing one at a time across a variety of event types. As far as I can tell, this is the only way that you can get something close to lapped races. Unfortunately, it's just a time trial and you can't really pick the vehicle, so I don't think it counts. Now, the Freeburn mode was a groundbreaking idea at the time that has since made its way into plenty of other racing games, such as Forza Horizon and of course almost every Need for Speed title since. It's a bit strange that you have to toggle online on and off because in modern open world racing games there's generally no concept of offline, it's all one and the same. If you want to complete the campaign stuff here, you'll have to switch back to the offline mode to see event markers on the map. I actually like this setup because it gives you the freedom to play how you want, and you can completely avoid obnoxious players online. Okay, so all of this is good stuff. The issue I have with the game is the structure. The fundamental difference between Paradise and the rest of the Burnout games as I see it is the need to memorize the map rather than developing an intimate knowledge of specific tracks. Sure, the more acquainted you become with the map, the better your understanding of when you need to brake and turn into specific corners, and learning the optimal line through each turn is still advantageous, but in all situations, winning is more dependent on knowing the fastest route. In layman's terms, the earlier games asked you to be a race driver, whereas Paradise wants you to be an Uber driver. Now, why is this a problem? Well, dedicated tracks allow for the pursuit of the perfect lap, and this is one of, if not the most important concepts in a racing game to me. Going fast and avoiding death by the skin of your teeth is fun, but what I'm searching for is the flow state that you can achieve when you get dialed into a track. This almost hypnotic process of going faster and faster, getting ever closer to the limit, and Paradise just doesn't have this. Instead, in this game, you need to keep one eye on the minimap to figure out where you're going, or worse, stop mid-race to check the full map for directions. I don't think the entire game's design needed to change to fix this problem either. Including one extra event type with races that have laps would have delivered enough of that classic Burnout experience. What's frustrating is it gets painstakingly close to doing exactly this with the Big Surf Island expansion. It does have a handful of lapped races that even have markers, making it much clearer where you need to go. I still find there's too much staring at the minimap, but at least you get a chance to learn the layout by the second lap. I enjoyed what's here, I just can't help but wish that the main game had included these types of events as well. The other issue is that the game doesn't really change over time. If you played through it for an hour or so, you've kind of seen most of what it has to offer, because no new event types open up the further in the game you get. It does get progressively harder, and vehicle choice becomes more important in the late game. You also unlock new and better cars, which keeps things interesting. Although this is a somewhat redundant process with the remaster, because you have so many top tier cars available from the start. Also, while the map is reasonably big, there are only a handful of race destinations. So despite there being countless routes that you can take, after a while it starts to feel a bit repetitive. Needing to drive to events becomes a pain later in the game as well, because the more events you complete, the further you have to drive to find one you haven't done. This problem extends to swapping, repairing and changing your vehicle's colour, all of which need to be done at locations on the map. Not being able to quickly change cars or fix them up prior to an event is almost immediately tedious. So, as good as the underlying gameplay is, the format is a radical departure from the earlier games, and I think you'll either love the freedom it provides, or you'll be dying for the tight structure and focus of the previous titles. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying this is a shit game, so you can pause with the angry comments about how cooked I am. I'm just making a point that this is a very different game to the others in the series, and it may or may not be to your liking. Shit, everything I just mentioned as a detractor might be the reason why you love this game. Like I said, the underlying gameplay is as good as it's ever been, and it has a ton of cars to collect and things to do. Additionally, driving around has a certain cathartic quality that a lot of games strive for but fail to achieve, and I appreciate what Criterion did here. The Burnout series was definitely starting to feel tired, and in spite of its issues, I think Burnout Paradise mostly succeeds at what it was trying to accomplish. At the end of the day though, I don't like open world racing games all that much, and this is not what I want from a Burnout game. There are a number of ways to play Paradise, and I think each one has something unique to offer. The commonality with all versions is the frame rate. Every version, including the PS3 and 360 originals, runs at 60 frames per second. On the older consoles, it has a display resolution of 720p, and if you pick up the Ultimate box, it's very similar from a content point of view to the remaster. Some people argue that the original release provides more of a challenge and more spectacular crashes, so this may be a reason to pick up the original release and avoid updating it. Unfortunately, the service for the PS3, 360 and the original PC port was shut down in 2019, so if you want some online action, the remaster is the way to go. However, I haven't had a great deal of success finding other players in the remaster on PlayStation, and based on Steam player numbers, it doesn't seem like there are many people playing it anymore. So I wouldn't bank on playing this online unless you know some people who own it. Unsurprisingly, I think the remaster is the definitive version for a number of reasons. I mentioned earlier that the remaster runs at 4K on the PS5. This is a native 4K, not upscaled, and the image is incredibly crisp, and it's the same for both the Series X and S. Of course, the game is available on the older PS4 and Xbox One hardware, and on the base systems you're looking at 60 FPS and 1080p. On the enhanced machines it's again 4K at 60 FPS. Now, some of you might be thinking that the remaster is simply the original PC port of the game, but it's not. The remaster has new high-res textures, better lighting effects, better reflections, high-quality shadows, and improved damage modeling. These changes aren't a night and day difference over the original, but if you're playing on a 2K or 4K monitor, it will be noticeably sharper. Thankfully, the remaster is available on PC too. The Switch version of the remaster is equivalent to the base PS4 and Xbox versions, except that some visual assets and things like shadows are presented at a lower resolution. In docked mode it has a 900p resolution, and in portable mode it's 720p. It runs at a pretty consistent 60 frames per second in both modes, but oddly it's slightly more stable in portable mode. Beyond the visuals, the remaster has all of the content ever released in one package, including Big Surf Island, which, as I mentioned before, is really the only way for circuit racing. So unless you really want to play it on the older hardware or are desperate for a more challenging game, the remaster is the way to go. So, do I recommend this? Well, despite being pretty negative about some parts of it, yeah, I do. Look, I don't love the open world format, and if you don't like open world racing games, then I don't think this will change your mind about them. That said, even though I think it's the second least enjoyable game in the series after the first game, it's still really enjoyable. Burnout is like peanut butter, or if you prefer pizza. Even when it's average, it's still pretty great. There is a lot of game here too, and for those who like exploring and experimenting, there's plenty of replayability beyond the dedicated events. Additionally, it holds up extremely well on modern hardware. It's hard to believe that this originally came out 16 years ago, and playing the remaster at 4K 60 without needing to compromise on features or visuals feels like living in some kind of modern gaming nirvana. Going back to play the earlier titles for this video, some of which it's been a hot minute since I last played, was honestly a bit of a challenge. If there was ever a need for proof that resolution matters, this is it, because I'm pretty sure that playing Dominator again has given me cataracts. Also, just as a side note, I'm not sure if I should be proud or ashamed that I've sunk almost 50 hours into Takedown. I think my time with Paradise proves just how timeless Burnout's gameplay is. Sure, some elements are clearly a time capsule, such as the pre-rendered cutscenes and listening to Avril Lavigne's Girlfriend, otherwise this could easily pass for a modern release. And this is important because this is likely to be the last Burnout game we'll ever see. Look, I've been wrong before, and I'm more than happy to be wrong again. It's just been 6 years since the remaster came out, so it doesn't look promising. We did get a spiritual successor a few years back from Three Fields Entertainment called Dangerous Driving. And while a solid game in its own right, retaining Burnout's signature speed and crashes, it doesn't really add anything new, and it ultimately feels a bit antiquated. Some people really love it though, so if you see it on sale, it's not terrible. Burnout Paradise is a unique entry in the series, and I'm guessing that for most people, it'll probably be the one that's the most enjoyable. Even if you don't like open world racing games, this is still worthy of a test drive, especially if you like the earlier titles.